My name is Zephyr, and I grew up in Willowbrook, a small town nestled against the edge of Shadowmere Forest. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business, but secrets still manage to fester behind closed doors. For my best friend Astria and me, those secrets were particularly dark and painful. We both came from homes where abuse was a daily reality. My father, a mean-spirited drunk with a motorcycle gang for friends, made our house a place of constant fear. Astria had it no better, living under the oppressive rule of her stepfather, a man whose public facade of respectability hid a monster. Shadowmere Forest became our sanctuary, a place where the troubles of home couldn't reach us. During the day, we'd explore every nook and cranny, building elaborate forts and imagining ourselves anywhere but Willowbrook. The townsfolk dismissed our forest excursions as typical childhood behavior, but for us, it was pure survival. I remember the day everything changed, as if it were yesterday. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, the air heavy with the scent of decaying leaves and the promise of winter. Astria and I were at our favorite spot near Shadowmere Lake, a vast body of water that always seemed to hold secrets beneath its placid surface. "Zephyr," Astria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Have you ever thought about just leaving, running away from all of this?" I looked at her, noting the fading bruise on her cheek that her long auburn hair couldn't quite hide. "All the time," I admitted. "But where would we go?" She shrugged, absent-mindedly tracing patterns in the damp earth. "Anywhere but here. Maybe we could make it to Crystalline City, find jobs, start over." I nodded, but we both knew it was just a fantasy. We were only 16, with no money and nowhere to go. Shadowmere Forest was our escape, but it was also our gilded cage. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lake's surface, we reluctantly made our way back to our respective homes. Little did we know that this would be the last normal day we'd have for a long, long time. It was a Friday night when everything went to hell. My father had been on a bender for days, and I could hear the ominous rumble of motorcycles approaching our house. The gang was coming, and I knew what that meant. I retreated to my room, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound of raucous laughter and breaking glass filled the house, and I could smell the acrid stench of cigarette smoke seeping under my door. I wedged my desk chair under the doorknob, a futile attempt at creating a barrier between me and the chaos outside. As the night wore on, I heard heavy footsteps approaching my room. The doorknob rattled, and a gruff voice called out, "Hey kid, come on out and join the party." I held my breath, praying they'd give up and go away, but the pounding on the door grew more insistent, and I could hear my father's slurred voice joining in. "Open up, you little shit." In a moment of panic, I did the only thing I could think of. I dove into my hamper, burying myself under a pile of dirty laundry. The smell was awful, but it was better than facing what waited for me outside. I don't know how long I stayed there, curled up in that cramped space, my heart thundering in my ears. It felt like hours. Eventually, the noise outside my room died down, replaced by the sound of snoring and occasional mumbling. Carefully, I extracted myself from the hamper, every muscle aching from being in such an awkward position for so long. I crept to my window, which faced the backyard, and slowly pushed it open. The cool night air hit my face, and I took a deep breath, savoring the momentary feeling of freedom. Our backyard was dark, lit only by the faint glow of a distant streetlight. I could see the outlines of motorcycles parked haphazardly near the gate. With trembling hands, I climbed out the window, dropping silently onto the soft grass below. I made my way to the back fence, my heart in my throat with every step. As I reached the corner, I paused, listening for any sign that I'd been discovered. Hearing nothing but the distant hoot of an owl, I scrambled over the fence, scraping my hands and knees in the process. I landed with a soft thud in Old Man Thaddeus's backyard. The eccentric hermit was sitting on his back porch, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Our eyes met, and for a moment I thought he might raise the alarm, but he just nodded slightly and looked away, pretending he hadn't seen me. It wasn't the first time he'd witnessed my escape, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. I ran through his yard and out onto the street, my bare feet slapping against the cold pavement. The 2 blocks to Astria's house felt like miles, but finally I arrived, out of breath and shaking. Her window was dark, but I tapped on it anyway, praying she'd hear me. After what felt like an eternity, the curtain twitched, and Astria's face appeared. Her eyes widened when she saw me, and she quickly opened the window. "Zephyr, what happened?" she whispered, taking in my disheveled appearance. "Can I come in?" I asked, my voice cracking. She glanced over her shoulder, fear flashing across her face. "I can't, they're fighting again. If they catch you here," I nodded, understanding all too well. "Then come with me. Please, I can't go back there tonight." Astria hesitated for just a moment before nodding. "Give me a second," she said, disappearing from the window. A few minutes later, she emerged, wearing a hoodie and carrying a small backpack. We didn't speak as we made our way towards Shadowmere Forest, both of us too wrapped up in our own thoughts and fears. As we entered the forest, the canopy of leaves above us blocked out what little moonlight there was, plunging us into near total darkness. We walked by memory, our feet finding the familiar path to Shadowmere Lake. When we reached our usual spot, Astria pulled out a small flashlight from her backpack, along with some snacks she'd managed to grab. We sat down on the damp grass, our backs against a large oak tree that overlooked the lake. "Want to talk about it?" Astria asked, offering me a slightly squashed granola bar. I shook my head, taking the bar with a grateful smile. "Not really, just the usual shit, you know." She nodded, understanding without needing the details. We sat in companionable silence for a while, munching on our meager snacks and listening to the night sounds of the forest. "Do you ever wonder what's really in there?" Astria asked suddenly, gesturing towards the lake. I shrugged. "Fish, water plants, the usual lake stuff, I guess." "Yeah, but have you ever noticed how no one ever swims in it, or fishes? It's just there." I had to admit, she had a point. Shadowmere Lake had always been a part of the landscape, but I couldn't remember ever seeing anyone use it for recreation or anything else. As if on cue, we heard a strange sound coming from the water's edge. It was faint at first, almost like the lapping of waves against the shore, but there was no wind that night to disturb the lake's surface. "Did you hear that?" Astria whispered, her eyes wide. I nodded, straining my ears to catch the sound again. There it was, a soft scraping noise, like something being dragged across pebbles. "Maybe it's an animal," I suggested, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "A raccoon or something." But even as I said it, I knew it didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. The noise was getting louder, more deliberate. It sounded almost human. Astria and I slowly got to our feet, our eyes fixed on the water's edge. The scraping sound was definitely coming closer, accompanied now by what sounded like labored breathing. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and scared in the darkness. "Is someone there? Do you need help?" There was no response, just the continued sound of something dragging itself towards us. Astria's hand found mine, squeezing it tightly. And then we saw it. A pale hand emerged from the water, its fingers unnaturally long and bent at odd angles. It was followed by another hand, and then a head of long, dark hair that hung in wet, tangled clumps. Astria's flashlight beam caught the figure as it pulled itself from the lake, and I felt my blood turn to ice. It was a woman, Or at least, it had once been a woman. Her skin was a sickly shade of green-gray, bloated and waterlogged. She wore what might have once been a white dress, now torn and stained with lakeweeds and what looked horribly like blood. But it was her face that made my heart stop. Her eyes were milky white, unseeing, and yet somehow fixed directly on us. Her mouth hung open, revealing blackened gums and teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. For a moment, everything was still. The woman, the thing, perched at the water's edge, staring at us with those blind eyes. And then, with a speed that seemed impossible for something that looked so decayed, it launched itself towards us. Astria screamed, dropping the flashlight as we both turned and ran. I could hear it behind us, a wet slapping sound as its bare feet hit the forest floor. The stench of rotting flesh and stagnant water filled my nostrils, making me gag as we crashed through the underbrush. We ran without direction, our only thought to get away from the horror pursuing us. Branches whipped at our faces, roots threatened to trip us with every step, but we didn't slow down. The sound of our pursuer never faded, always right behind us, accompanied by a high-pitched keening that didn't sound like any noise a human throat should be able to make. I don't know how long we ran. It could have been minutes or hours. But eventually we burst out of the tree line, stumbling onto the street that bordered Shadowmere Forest. The sudden light from the street lamps was blinding after the darkness of the woods. Gasping for air, we turned to look back at the forest. There, just at the edge of the trees, stood the woman. She swayed slightly, her head tilted at an unnatural angle as she stared at us with those milky eyes. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish out of water. What is that thing?" Astria whispered, her voice trembling. I shook my head, unable to form words. As we watched, the woman took a step forward, then another. She was coming out of the woods. "Run!" I managed to croak out. "Run!" We took off down the street, our bare feet slapping against the pavement. I chanced a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. The woman was running after us, but her movements were all wrong. Her limbs jerked and twitched, her head lolling from side to side as she gave chase. We reached the intersection at the end of the street, and without thinking, I pulled Astria towards my house. It was closer, and I knew my father and his friends would be passed out by now. As we neared my house, I risked another look back. The woman had stopped at the edge of the street, her figure illuminated by the harsh orange glow of a streetlight. She stood there, swaying slightly, her eyes fixed on us. We didn't stop to question our luck. We raced up to my house, and I quickly retrieved the spare key from its hiding spot under a loose brick. With shaking hands, I unlocked the door, and we tumbled inside, slamming it shut behind us. The house was quiet, the only sound the muffled snoring coming from the living room. Astria and I leaned against the door, our chests heaving as we tried to catch our breath. What was that thing?" Astria whispered again, her eyes wide with fear. I shook my head, still unable to process what we'd just seen. "I don't know, but it couldn't have been real, right? Maybe someone was playing a sick joke on us." Even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. No costume or special effects could have created what we'd seen. The smell alone. We spent the rest of the night huddled in my room, the door locked and the chair wedged under the handle once again. Neither of us slept, jumping at every creak of the house settling or distant dog bark. As the first light of dawn began to filter through my window, Astria and I made a pact. We would never speak of what we'd seen to anyone. Who would believe us anyway? But we also swore that we would never go back to Shadowmere Lake at night. Never again. The days following our terrifying encounter at Shadowmere Lake passed in a haze of fear and paranoia. Astria and I went through the motions of our daily lives. attending Willowbrook High, doing our chores, trying to avoid the wrath of our respective tormentors. But everything felt different now. The world seemed darker, more dangerous, as if the veil between our normal reality and something much more sinister had been torn away. We tried to convince ourselves that what we'd seen that night had been a hallucination, a shared delusion brought on by stress and lack of sleep. But deep down, we both knew the truth. The woman from the lake had been real, and she was still out there somewhere. At school, we kept to ourselves even more than usual. Our classmates, who had always viewed us as the weird, quiet kids, now gave us an even wider berth. I caught snippets of whispered conversations in the hallways. "Did you see how pale they look?" "I heard they were out in the forest all night." "Maybe they're on that new designer drug from Crystalline City." Let them talk, I thought. They had no idea what was really out there. Astria and I spent our lunch periods huddled in a quiet corner of the library, poring over every book we could find on local legends and folklore. We were looking for anything that might explain what we'd seen, any story of a spectral woman haunting Shadowmere Lake. But we found nothing. As the days turned into weeks, the immediate terror of that night began to fade, replaced by a constant, low-level anxiety that never quite went away. We still avoided the forest at night, but during the day, we found ourselves drawn back there, as if some invisible force was pulling us towards the lake. One crisp autumn afternoon, about a month after our encounter, Astria and I decided to revisit the spot where we'd seen the woman. We told ourselves it was to look for clues, to find some rational explanation for what had happened. But deep down, I think we both hoped to prove to ourselves that it had all been in our heads. As we approached the lake, the forest seemed unnaturally quiet. No birds sang, no squirrels chattered. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. We reached the shore where we'd been sitting that night and stopped, both of us hesitant to go any further. "Do you see anything?" Astria whispered, her eyes scanning the water's edge. I shook my head, relief and disappointment warring inside me. "Nothing. It looks normal." We stood there for a long moment, the only sound our own shallow breathing. Then, just as we were about to turn and leave, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, half submerged in the mud at the water's edge, was a tarnished locket. With trembling hands, I reached down and picked it up. It was old, the metal corroded by years in the water, but there was no mistaking what it was. A heart-shaped pendant on a delicate chain. Astria's sharp intake of breath told me she'd seen it too. "Zephyr," she said, her voice barely audible. "We need to tell someone." I nodded, my mouth too dry to speak. But who could we tell? Who would believe us? The answer came to us both at the same time. Old Man Thaddeus. Thaddeus lived on the outskirts of Willowbrook, in a ramshackle house that looked like it might collapse in a strong wind. He was a local legend himself, known for his vast knowledge of the area's history and his collection of odd artifacts. Some people called him a witch, others a fraud, but everyone agreed that if anyone knew about strange occurrences in Shadowmere Forest, it would be him. We made our way to Thaddeus's house, the locket burning a hole in my pocket. As we approached the sagging porch, I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool autumn air. Astria raised her hand to knock, but before her knuckles could touch the weathered wood, the door creaked open. Thaddeus stood there, his rheumy eyes peering at us from beneath bushy white eyebrows. "I've been expecting you," he said, his voice like gravel. "Come in, children. We have much to discuss." Exchanging a nervous glance, Astria and I followed the old man into his house. The interior was cluttered with books, strange artifacts, and jars filled with things I couldn't and didn't want to identify. Thaddeus led us to a small sitting room and gestured for us to take a seat on a worn sofa. "You've seen her, haven't you?" he asked without preamble. "The Lady of Shadowmere." I felt the blood drain from my face. How did you know?" Thaddeus sighed, lowering himself into an armchair that creaked ominously under his weight. "Because you're not the first, and I fear you won't be the last. She's been haunting these woods for generations, but few live to tell the tale." With shaking hands, I pulled the locket from my pocket and held it out to him. "We found this today, by the lake." Thaddeus took the locket, turning it over in his gnarled hands. His eyes widened slightly, and for a moment I thought I saw fear flicker across his weathered face. "You've drawn her attention," he said quietly. "And now, I'm afraid, she won't let you go easily." "Who is she?" Astria asked, her voice trembling. "What does she want?" Thaddeus leaned back in his chair, his eyes taking on a faraway look. "Her name was Isolde," he began, his voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller. "She lived in Willowbrook over a century ago, when the town was little more than a logging camp on the edge of Shadowmere Forest." He paused, his gnarled fingers tracing the pattern on the locket. "Isolde was beautiful, they say, with hair as dark as a raven's wing, and eyes the color of the lake on a stormy day. She was betrothed to the son of the lumber baron who owned half the forest, but her heart belonged to another, a young worker named Finn." Astria and I leaned forward, captivated despite our fear. Thaddeus continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Isolde and Finn would meet in secret by Shadowmere Lake, planning to run away together. But on the night they were to leave, Isolde's fiancé discovered their plan. In a rage, he confronted them at the lake. There was a struggle, and Isolde fell into the water." Thaddeus's eyes met mine, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "They say Finn tried to save her, but her dress was too heavy, dragging her down into the depths. By the time help arrived, it was too late. Isolde was gone, her body never found." "But that's not the end of the story, is it?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Thaddeus shook his head slowly. "No, child, it's not. They say Isolde's spirit still haunts Shadowmere Lake, seeking vengeance against those who wronged her. Some nights when the moon is full and the mist rises from the water, she emerges, searching for her lost love, or for new victims to drag into the depths with her." A heavy silence fell over the room as Thaddeus finished his tale. Astria's hand found mine, squeezing it tightly. "But why us?" she asked. "We didn't do anything to her." Thaddeus's gaze fell to the locket in his hand. "Perhaps you reminded her of what she lost. Or perhaps," he trailed off, his brow furrowing. "Perhaps what?" I prompted, my heart racing. The old man's eyes met mine, and I saw a mixture of fear and determination in them. "Perhaps you're the ones who can finally put her spirit to rest." As if on cue, a gust of wind rattled the windows, making us all jump. Outside, the sun had set, plunging Willowbrook into darkness, and somewhere in that darkness I knew the Lady of Shadowmere was waiting. Astria and I left Old Man Thaddeus's house that night with our heads spinning. The tale of Isolde and her tragic fate seemed too fantastical to be true, yet it explained so much about what we had witnessed at Shadowmere Lake. As we walked home through the darkening streets of Willowbrook, we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "What do you think he meant?" Astria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "About us being the ones to put her spirit to rest?" I shook my head, feeling the weight of the locket in my pocket. Thaddeus had insisted we take it with us, saying it might be the key to unraveling the mystery. "I don't know, but I'm not sure I want to find out. Maybe we should just forget about all of this." Astria stopped walking and turned to face me, her eyes blazing with a determination I hadn't seen in years. We can't, Zephyr. You know we can't. If what Thaddeus said is true, Isolde will keep haunting Shadowmere Lake, maybe even hurting people. We have to do something. I wanted to argue, to say that it wasn't our responsibility, that we were just kids trying to survive our own personal hells. But deep down, I knew she was right. We had been chosen, for better or worse, and we couldn't turn our backs on this. Okay, I said finally. But where do we even start? Astria thought for a moment. The library. There must be records from that time, old newspapers, something that can corroborate Thaddeus's story. If we can find out more about Isolde, Finn, and what really happened that night, maybe we can figure out how to help her move on. I nodded, a plan starting to form in my mind. We should also try to find out more about the locket. Maybe it belonged to Isolde, or it could be connected to her in some way. As we continued walking, the streetlights flickered ominously. A cold breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint sound of weeping. Astria and I exchanged a glance, picking up our pace. The next few days were a whirlwind of research and mounting anxiety. We spent every free moment in the Willowbrook Public Library, poring over microfiche of old newspapers and dusty town records. The librarian, Mrs. Pendlebrook, eyed us suspiciously, but didn't interfere with our investigations. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. We found articles about the logging camp that would eventually become Willowbrook, mentions of the wealthy Blackwood family that owned much of the surrounding forest, and even a few references to a scandal involving the youngest Blackwood son and a local girl. But it was an obituary from 1889 that sent chills down our spines. It read, "Tragic accident at Shadowmere Lake. Miss Isolde Crane, 18, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Edmund Crane, drowned yesterday evening in a boating accident on Shadowmere Lake. Miss Crane was to be married next month to Mr. Everett Blackwood, son of lumber baron Silas Blackwood. The community mourns this terrible loss." "This is it," Astria whispered, her finger tracing the faded print. "This has to be her." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of excitement and dread. But there's no mention of Finn, or any suspicion of foul play. It's like they just swept the whole thing under the rug. "Of course they did," Astria said bitterly. "The Blackwoods probably owned half the town. They wouldn't want a scandal tarnishing their name." As we continued our research, we discovered more unsettling details. There were reports of strange sightings around Shadowmere Lake in the years following Isolde's death. Loggers spoke of a woman in white wandering the shoreline, her cries echoing through the trees. Fishermen refused to cast their lines in the lake, claiming something in the water would tug at their boats on moonlit nights. But most disturbing of all were the disappearances. Every few years, someone would vanish near Shadowmere Lake, often young couples. The official reports always cited accidents or runaways, but the pattern was undeniable. One afternoon, as we were leaving the library, we quite literally ran into Callum Blackwood, a descendant of the original Blackwood family and one of the most popular boys in our school. Books and papers scattered across the sidewalk as we collided. "Watch where you're going, freaks," Callum sneered, brushing off his expensive jacket. Then his eyes fell on one of the newspaper printouts we'd been carrying. His face paled. "What are you doing with that?" Before I could stop her, Astria snatched up the paper. "Just a history project," she said coolly. "Fascinating stuff about your family's past, Callum. Lots of skeletons in that fancy closet of yours, huh?" Callum's eyes narrowed dangerously. "I'd be careful if I were you," he hissed. "Some secrets are better left buried. For your own good, stay away from Shadowmere Lake." As he stormed off, Astria and I exchanged a look. It was clear that the Blackwood family knew more than they were letting on. But how much did Callum know? And how far would he go to keep the family's secrets hidden? That night, as I lay in bed trying to make sense of everything we'd learned, I heard a faint tapping at my window. At first, I thought it was just a branch in the wind, but then I saw her. Isolde's face pressed against the glass, her long, dark hair floating around her as if she were still underwater. Her milky eyes stared right at me, and her mouth opened in a silent scream. I bolted upright, my heart pounding, but when I looked again, she was gone. Only the locket on my nightstand gave any indication that it hadn't all been a dream. As I tried to calm my racing thoughts, I realized with growing dread that we were in way over our heads. Isolde's spirit was restless. The Blackwood family was hiding something, and Astria and I were caught in the middle of a century-old tragedy that threatened to consume us all. The next morning I called Astria as soon as I woke up, my voice shaking as I recounted my nighttime visitation from Isolde. She listened in stunned silence, then said, "We need to end this, Zephyr. Tonight." We agreed to meet at the edge of Shadowmere Forest at dusk. As I packed a backpack with flashlights, the locket, and some of our research notes, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something far more dangerous than we realized. The day crawled by, each minute feeling like an hour. When I finally met Astria at our designated spot, the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. She looked as nervous as I felt. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, giving her one last chance to back out. Astria nodded, her jaw set with determination. "We have to try, for Isolde, and for us." As we made our way through the darkening forest towards Shadowmere Lake, the woods seemed to close in around us. The familiar paths felt twisted and wrong, as if the very landscape was trying to keep us away from our destination. We had almost reached the lake when we heard voices ahead. Crouching behind a large oak, we peered through the underbrush to see Callum Blackwood and two of his friends standing at the water's edge. "I'm telling you, those freaks know something," Callum was saying, his voice tight with anger. "If they start digging too deep, it could ruin everything. My father would kill me if he knew I let this get out of hand." One of his friends, a burly guy I recognized from the football team, cracked his knuckles. "So what do you want us to do about it?" Callum's face twisted into a cruel smirk. "Scare them. Rough them up a little if you have to. Just make sure they understand that some stories are better left untold." Astria and I exchanged a horrified look. We had stumbled onto something bigger than we'd imagined. The Blackwood family wasn't just hiding an old scandal. They were actively working to keep the truth buried. We began to back away slowly, but Astria's foot caught on a root, sending her stumbling. The noise alerted Callum and his friends, who spun around to face us. "Well, well," Callum sneered. "Looks like the town freaks decided to take a little moonlight stroll. Bad move." As Callum and his friends advanced on us, the air suddenly grew cold. A thick mist began to rise from the lake, swirling around our feet, and then we heard it, a soft, mournful singing drifting across the water. Everyone froze. The singing grew louder, and I realized with a start that I recognized the melody. It was an old lullaby, one my grandmother used to sing to me when I was little. "What the hell is that?" one of Callum's friends whispered, his voice shaking. Before anyone could answer, a figure emerged from the mist. Isolde glided across the surface of the lake, her white dress billowing around her, her dark hair floating as if she were still underwater. Her eyes, no longer milky white but a deep, stormy gray, were fixed on Callum. Callum's face drained of all color. "No," he whispered. "It can't be. You're not real." Isolde's mouth opened, and when she spoke, her voice was like the rustling of dead leaves. "You carry the sins of your ancestors, Everett Blackwood. The time has come to pay for what was done to me. With a speed that defied her ethereal appearance, Isolde lunged forward, her cold, wet hands grasping Callum's shirt. He screamed, a sound of pure terror that cut through the night air. His friends, overcome with fear, turned and ran, leaving Callum to his fate. Without thinking, I stepped forward, the locket clutched in my hand. "Isolde, wait!" Her head snapped towards me, those storm-gray eyes boring into mine. I held out the locket, my hand trembling. "This was yours, wasn't it? You were loved, Isolde, truly loved." Isolde's grip on Callum loosened slightly, her gaze fixed on the locket. Slowly, as if in a trance, she reached out to touch it. The moment her fingers brushed the metal, a pulse of energy surged through the air. Memories that weren't my own flooded my mind. Isolde and a young man with kind eyes laughing by the lake, stolen kisses in the shadow of tall pines, whispered promises of a future together. "Finn," Isolde breathed, her voice suddenly soft and full of longing. Astria stepped forward, her voice gentle. "He loved you, Isolde. He never forgot you. All these years it's been your love keeping you here, not your anger." Isolde's form seemed to flicker, becoming more transparent. She turned back to Callum, who was on his knees, shaking uncontrollably. "Your ancestor took everything from me," she said, her voice echoing with a century of pain. "But I won't let that define me any longer. Your family's sins are your own to bear now." With those words, Isolde began to fade, her form dissolving into mist. As she disappeared, the locket in my hand grew warm. I opened it to find a small, sepia-toned photograph inside. A young woman with Isolde's features, smiling next to a man who could only be Finn. Callum scrambled to his feet, his eyes wild. What just happened?" I looked at him, feeling a mixture of pity and disgust. "The truth came out, Callum. After all these years, Isolde's story has finally been told. What you do with that truth is up to you now." As if in a daze, Callum stumbled away into the darkness of the forest. Astria and I stood there for a long moment, the weight of what we'd just experienced settling over us. "Do you think it's really over?" Astria asked softly. I closed the locket, feeling its warmth against my palm. "I think Isolde is at peace now. But the legacy of what happened here, that's something this town will have to reckon with for a long time to come." We made our way back through the forest, the paths now clear and familiar once more. As we emerged from the tree line, the first light of dawn was breaking over Willowbrook. It felt symbolic somehow, the long, dark night of secrets and shadows giving way to the harsh light of truth. In the weeks that followed, the story of Isolde and the Blackwood family's dark past came to light. Old records were discovered. Witnesses came forward with stories that had been passed down through generations. The town was forced to confront its history, with all its ugly truths and long-buried secrets. Callum and his family left Willowbrook soon after, unable to face the shame and scrutiny. Last I heard, the Blackwood estate was being turned into a historical museum dedicated to preserving the true history of our town. As for Astria and me, we found that our brush with the supernatural had changed us. We were no longer content to be victims of our circumstances. With the support of a few caring adults who had finally opened their eyes to what was happening, we were able to escape our abusive homes and start building better lives for ourselves. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I still find myself drawn to the shores of Shadowmere Lake. But now, when I look out over its dark waters, I don't feel fear. Instead, I feel a sense of peace and the faint echo of a love that was strong enough to transcend death itself. The locket sits on my dresser, a reminder of the power of truth and the importance of confronting the shadows of the past. And though I know there are still dark things lurking in the corners of the world, I face them now with courage, knowing that even the deepest, darkest secrets cannot stay buried forever. The women and children gathered around their old grandmother, who began telling them in a soft voice, "In our village, there was an elderly man married to one of his cousins. They had 6 sons who grew up to be strong men, helping their father with tasks and bringing honor in all occasions. This sheikh was brave, generous, and beloved. His people would travel with him when he traveled and settle when he settled. None of them would go against his opinion or deviate from his path. It was the custom of this sheikh and his sons that when they settled in a place, he would make his house on elevated ground, with his sons' houses surrounding it, 3 on the right and 3 on the left. The sheikh's wife, his cousin, grew old while the sheikh remained strong, full of joy and vitality. The sheikh secretly consulted some trusted individuals about marrying a second wife. They advised him to marry a beautiful girl they knew from a noble tribe, renowned for honor and Arab heritage. The sheikh was determined to marry, but kept the matter secret, fearing his old wife and their sons might ruin it. The sheikh thought of a sudden and decisive way for this marriage and found the method. One day, he chose 10 members of the tribe, none of whom were his sons or close relatives. He announced that he would raid an opposing tribe with them in a quick attack and return soon. The sheikh and his 10 companions traveled until they reached the dwellings of the tribe where the girl he wanted to propose to lived. They stayed as guests with her father, who was also the sheikh of his tribe. The host sheikh welcomed them, lit the fire, added plenty of wood, and served his guests coffee and tea. Then he presented them with sacrificial animals in a lavish feast. After the meal, the guest sheikh spoke privately with his host and said, "I have come to propose to your daughter." The girl's father replied, "Welcome, I have only raised her for a successful, happy marriage." They called for the religious official immediately, and the marriage contract was concluded. The sheikh consummated the marriage with his wife that night. In the morning, the sheikh asked permission to leave and took his wife with him. He returned with her to his people's dwellings and settled his wife in a house on the outskirts of the neighborhood. The sheikh's sons learned of this marriage and informed their mother. There was much whispering between the sons and their mother. Feelings of jealousy and competition stirred in the mother. She began to adorn herself, apply kohl to her eyes, comb her hair, and wear her jewelry. She asked her husband to alternate nights between her and the other wife, while before this marriage she had not slept near her husband. She no longer had desires or passions. The sheikh responded to his wife and cousin's wish and began to divide his nights fairly between his wives. The sheikh would apologize to his old wife, try to soothe her, and attempt to extinguish her anger and jealousy as much as he could. But the factors of jealousy and competition were at their peak. This competition between the wives continued for a short period, then ended in favor of the new wife because the competitors were unequal. Things settled down and the situation became normal. The old wife and her sons accepted this new reality, despite its bitterness and pain. The new wife took control of her husband's heart and feelings. She possessed his affairs so that he would not settle in a place except by her command, nor would he travel except by her order. This became hard on the sons, and their sorrow and pain increased, but they could not say anything for fear of angering their father. So they controlled their nerves and let things proceed as destined. One day, they noticed that the new wife had put her tribe's brand on one of their father's purebred camels. This hurt the sons' feelings even more. They said among themselves that this strange girl had bewitched their father until he began to follow her desires. fulfill her requests, and not deviate from what she wanted. The eldest said, "What do you want us to do? We cannot do anything because we don't want to anger our father or make our enemies rejoice." The sons remained silent, though disgruntled. This incident passed peacefully, but one day the sons were shocked to see that the new wife had put her tribe's brand on an entire herd of their prized camels. Here, by herd, we mean a group of 3 to 10 camels. The foreign wife had asked her husband for this herd, and he gave it to her, allowing her to put her tribe's brand on each one. When the 6 sons saw what their father's wife had done, they nearly lost their minds, but they counseled each other to be patient. They went to their eldest brother and complained about the situation, saying, "The matter has reached a point where we cannot remain silent. This foreign girl has bewitched our father and completely dominated him. He would not settle or travel except by her command, and we accepted and remained silent about this. Then she put her tribe's brand on our best camel, and we accepted and endured that. Now she puts her tribe's brand on an entire herd, our most prized and honorable herd. Our patience has run out, and there is no more room for tolerance. We have no doubt that this foreign wife has bewitched our father, so that through this magic she controls him and dictates her orders to him as she pleases and desires. The matter has reached a level where silence is not appropriate." The eldest brother said, "I agree with you that our father is not in his right mind, and his actions are not sound. I have no doubt that this foreign wife has done something to him so that he no longer goes against her opinion or refuses her requests. But what is the way to address this situation? If we talk to our father, we will anger him, and he may become even more impulsive in his actions. So what should we do?" The youngest said, "I have an idea." The brother and the others asked, "What is the idea?" He said, "We should go to our region's prince, complain about our father, tell him about his actions, and inform him that this foreign wife has bewitched him. We should request that our case, ours, our father's, and his new wife's, be referred to the Islamic judge to rule on the matter and settle the dispute." The sons complained about their father and his wife. The prince was hesitant to accept the sons' complaint against their father, but the sons insisted to the prince and affirmed the truth of their claim. They said, "The law is the law when it comes to fathers and sons, and our complaint is not against our father, but rather the complaint is directed with all its weight at that foreign wife who has done these deeds and turned men's minds, and her actions have become a source of suspicion." The prince sent a messenger to summon the sheikh and his foreign wife. The sheikh came with his wife, unaware of his son's complaint. When he arrived and greeted the prince said to him, "Your sons have filed a complaint against you, or against your wife, or against both of you, and now I will send you to the judge to look into the case." The sheikh was stunned and said, "There is no power or strength except with Allah. My sons are complaining about me." Everyone went to the judge and sat in a circle around him. The judge looked at them and said, "Who is the plaintiff?" The 6 sons said in unison, "We are." The judge asked again, "And who is the defendant?" They also said, "Our father and his wife." The judge asked about the wife, and the sheikh said, "She is here at the door." The judge ordered her to be present and to hear the accusations against her and to defend herself against those accusations. The wife came, and the judge spoke, saying, "Appoint one of you brothers to speak on your behalf. Let only one of you be the speaker." They appointed their eldest, and the judge asked him about his claim. He said, "My brothers and I accuse our father's wife of bewitching him and controlling his emotions until he follows her like a camel led by its reins." The judge said, "What is your evidence for your words?" The eldest brother said, "Our father used to be of sound opinion, correct thinking, and reasonable actions until this wife came. Now she directs him as she wishes. He doesn't travel except by her command, nor does he settle except by her order. Finally, he gave her his most precious and expensive camels, and she put her tribe's brand on those camels, which are the herd of Majahim. This is our complaint against our father and his new wife." The judge turned to the father and said to him, "What do you think of these words?" The sheikh said, "The complaint is directed at my wife in the first place, and in this case, I have fallen between two millstones. Therefore, my position in this case will be as a witness, because the complaint is primarily directed against my wife, and I will not intervene in this dispute except when a question or inquiry is directed at me." The judge asked him, "Has your wife bewitched you as your sons say?" He said, "I don't feel anything like this, but a bewitched person may not know that he is bewitched, just as a madman may not feel that he is mad. Magic is something hidden that is only known by its effects." The judge said, "What is your answer about the herd of camels that you gave to your new wife?" The sheikh said, "As for the herd of camels, yes, I gave them to her because I had shortchanged her dowry at the time of marriage, so I wanted to compensate her for what she missed. In fact, I gave her the herd, but it's still mine. The herd comes and goes to us, so it's as if nothing has changed." The judge finished his questions for the sheikh, and it was the wife's turn. The judge directed this question to her, saying, "You have heard what your husband's sons said and the accusation they made against you. Is it true that you have bewitched your husband so that he follows what you want obediently and doesn't act except by your command? What do you say about this accusation?" The judge leaned forward, waiting for the wife's answer. The sheikh's sons also anticipated what this wife would say. The wife spoke and said, "Yes, I have bewitched him." The judge raised his head, and the sons perked up, saying to themselves, "We have won, for she has confessed to the charge, and all that remains is the judgment against her." The judge said, "And how did you bewitch him?" The wife said, "I bewitched him with my beauty and captured his emotions with my smooth cheek, kohl-lined eyes, and long hair. When he comes home, he finds me, and when he calls me, I come, or if he asks something of me, I comply. He hears from me only what he loves and sees from me only what he desires. If he gets angry, I remain silent. If he is quiet, I speak. If he is generous, I thank him. If he falls short, I am patient. With these qualities and their like, yes, I have bewitched him. If in doing this there is anything that contradicts the law or detracts from honor, then judge me, O judge, with what I deserve." After the sheikh's sons heard the wife's words, they shrank back and knew that the judgment would not be in their favor. The judge pronounced the verdict, saying, "By your life, this is indeed the lawful magic that all men seek. Rise, O sons, for you have no case against your sheikh or his wife." The disputants left the judge's assembly and mounted their riding animals. They formed a single line on one road. The sheikh felt the bitterness of defeat for his sons and comforted them. The sons felt their wrongdoing towards their father and his wife and began to atone for their sin. The father learned from the proceedings of the case that what angered his sons most and hurt their feelings was giving his wife that herd of Majahim camels. For this reason, he distributed to his sons camels from the best camels he owned. With this, their hearts were calmed, and they relented towards their father. They never again tried to spoil that good relationship with his new wife, a relationship filled with love and harmony in which their sheikh lived. Things continued in this manner, but every state comes to an end, and every gathering leads to separation. Glory be to the one who does not change or cease to exist. The dove of peace fluttered over the house of the old sheikh and his beautiful, enchanting wife. The tale has ended. It was my third week as a ranger in Yosemite, back in '78. Fresh out of the academy, a little green, but not too bad at figuring out trails. Plus, let's be honest, who couldn't get used to those views every day? It wasn't the glorious peaks or waterfalls that got me, though. I liked the quiet of Yosemite Valley, the way you could hear birds even with the folks milling around, the thick smell of the pines. That was my jam. The weirdness started with Gary. Old Gary was a park hand, been around since like the park opened or something. Anyway, he found me checking the signage on Lower Yosemite Fall Trail. He usually kept to himself, so it was a surprise to see him out of his normal haunts. "Say, Ethan," Gary rasped, voice sounding rusty, "ever go back behind the falls?" "Nah, not really," I said, adjusting a loose sign. "Not much point when you get this view right here, right?" He cackled, this kind of wet, phlegmy sound. "Maybe not point for everyone," he muttered. "Maybe those falls hide more than water." Before I could ask more than water like what, Gary was gone. He moved quick for an old guy. Weird cat, I thought, chuckling to myself at the old-timer with his cryptic messages. But Gary's words stuck with me. I mean, he wouldn't have said something like that for nothing, right? Yosemite was big. You never knew what critters were lurking in the back country. Couple days later, I was taking stock of bear canisters at a campsite when I spotted a figure deeper in the woods. Now, folks wander off all the time, but there was a hunched strangeness to this one. Plus, they moved like they knew what they were doing, like maybe they shouldn't be back there. I shrugged, more on instinct than anything, and headed after them. The trees swallowed us right up, the only sound my boots on the trail and that figure shuffling ahead. Every once in a while, they'd glance back. They couldn't see me well in the dim light, but they sensed someone was there. Then, just as quick as they showed up, they were gone, like vanished into thin air. Back at camp, a sinking feeling gnawed at my guts. I shrugged it off, attributing it to my newbie jitters. That same night, though, I couldn't shake the image of what I'd seen, or rather not seen, when the figure glanced back. Instead of eyes, there were just these deep, empty sockets. It wasn't an illusion of light, I knew that much. The next few days went by in a blur. Routine patrols, fixing signs, standard ranger stuff. But those empty eyes haunted me. It's funny how your brain works, isn't it? You think you're tough, all prepared, but then something real weird comes along and you're back to sleeping with the light on. Me? I couldn't shake this feeling that something was watching me, a presence in the trees just lurking. I was starting to spook myself. Then came the call late one night. It was Gary on the park radio, his voice shaking like a leaf. "Ethan, it's back. God help me, it's back," he gasped. "The thing behind the falls, it took Davy." "Who's Davy?" I wanted to ask. But then it hit me. Davy was one of the seasonal guys, young kid full of jokes and energy. And now, gone? Gary's voice cut through the static, frantic and desperate. "We gotta find him, Ethan. Please. I can't let it take anyone else." The line went dead. Adrenaline surged through my veins, fear replaced with a grim determination. Gary wasn't one to blow things out of proportion. Something was wrong, seriously wrong. It took me half an hour to get to the base of Lower Yosemite Fall. The moon barely cut through the thick canopy of trees, making the forest eerie and disorienting. Gary's pickup sat there, abandoned, headlights still on. I grabbed my flashlight, scanning the woods for any sign of him or Davy. My heart pounded in my ears, every rustle a potential threat. "Gary!" I shouted into the dark, but only echoing silence answered me. I moved deeper into the forest, flashlight beam flickering over the trail leading towards the waterfall. Even amidst the panic, I couldn't help but take a breath. The waterfall roared into the night, mist swirling up, catching the moonlight like an ethereal veil. and then a flicker of movement in the mist near the base of the falls. Instinctively, I ducked behind a boulder, my heart pounding a deafening rhythm in my ears. Peeking out, I could make out a dark shape near the water's edge. It was tall, too tall, and unnaturally thin. It moved with a jerky, inhuman grace, its limbs impossibly long and spindly. It stood there for a moment, seemingly unaware of my presence. "Davy?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The creature whipped around, the movement so fast it almost looked like a glitch in reality. The darkness concealed most of it, but I could still make out its outline, a long, withered body, arms reaching almost to the ground, and where its head should have been, there was nothing but a smooth, featureless expanse. The creature lurched toward me, its movements jerky and unsettling. A wave of nausea washed over me as a stench like rotting flesh flooded the air. I raised my flashlight, the beam hitting the creature square in its chest, but it seemed unfazed. It moved so fast I barely had time to react. I felt a sharp blow to my hand, sending my flashlight spinning into the darkness. Pain exploded in my wrist. A bone-chilling shriek pierced the air as the creature lunged. I scrambled backwards, my eyes desperately searching the darkness for my flashlight. I tripped over a root, landing hard, the creature's hot, fetid breath washing over me. I fumbled in the dark, finally finding the flashlight. Hitting the power switch, I directed the beam right at the creature. An ear-splitting shriek reverberated through the forest, and the creature recoiled, its skin burning where the beam hit it. I grabbed hold of a fallen branch and swung, my clumsy blow making contact with the creature's shoulder. It let out another chilling scream, stumbling back with a force that shook the ground beneath me. Time seemed to slow down as I stumbled for my dropped gun, fingers fumbling like I'd never handled a weapon before. The stench of decay was overwhelming, making me gag. Finally, my hand closed around the grip, my trembling fingers flicking the safety off. The creature was regaining its footing, its form blurring in the darkness as it lunged again. I fired once, twice, the deafening shots echoing through the forest. The creature screeched, a sound that made my blood run cold, then staggered backwards, clutching at its chest where the bullets had pierced its withered flesh. With every step it took, a dark, viscous trail followed. A flicker of light caught my eye. Gary. He was stumbling out of the woods, clutching at a makeshift torch and a rifle. "Ethan, behind you," he yelled, his voice hoarse. I spun around, but the creature had vanished. The only trace it had left behind was the inky liquid seeping into the ground. Gary lowered his rifle, his breath ragged. "That thing," he gasped. "It ain't natural, Ethan." "I know, Gary." The events of the night crashing over me like a wave. We made our way back to the pickup, the silence broken only by our labored breathing and the crunch of leaves beneath our boots. I felt a strange hollowness inside of me, like something fundamental had shifted within. Gary slumped into the driver's seat, exhaustion etched on his face. "Gotta get word out," he muttered. "More rangers. Need backup. Can't let it take others." He started the engine, the headlights slicing through the darkness. As we pulled away, I couldn't help but look back at the base of the falls. The mist danced and swirled, concealing whatever secrets might lay hidden within. The rest is a blur. The frantic radio calls, the arrival of a full team of rangers, and the search that lasted days. We found Davy's remains tucked into an unseen crevice near the falls, his body torn apart. The creature, however, vanished without a trace. It was as if it had been swallowed by the very earth itself. Officially, the case was filed as an animal attack, but I knew, we all did, that what lurked in Yosemite's shadow was something far more sinister. Gary retired soon after. They say he moved up north, someplace remote. Some say the guilt was too much for him. Others whisper he hunts the creature still, obsessed with vengeance for his lost crewmen. As for me, they put me on leave, said I needed a break from the stress. Truth is, I'd seen things nobody should ever have to witness, and it changes a person. Years passed. I did go back to Yosemite eventually. I couldn't stay away from the mountains. But it was never the same. There's a chill in the air. A quiet late at night when the wind whispers through the pines. I swear I hear a shriek in the distance. A hollow, chilling sound that makes my blood run cold. The locals started whispering about the Shrieker of the Falls, a creature of shadow and myth. They tell tales of hikers vanishing into the mist, snatched by something unseen and monstrous. I stay silent, knowing the awful truth behind the legend. Maybe one day that thing will resurface from whatever dark hole it crawled into, and maybe one day I'll be there to stop it. I owe Davy at least that much. Until then, all I can do is listen to those chilling whispers on the wind and remember the night I faced the unfathomable and barely survived.